chicks can't go straight out to pasture. They need a place that keeps them warm and dry initially. It simulates the heat and protection that a mother hen would offer to the birds. And so this brooder in particular has been built so that we get a lot of good heat convection. Here in Florida it gets pretty toasty, so we need a good balance of providing heat to the birds but also providing space for them to cool themselves down. So we provide a heat source here, and we allow them to move about this big space to heat or cool themselves as they desire. They have open food, open water, and the bedding gets changed regularly, or added to rather, so that it stays clean and tidy. This is what we call an Ohio brooder, or a hover brooder. It has some legs that it sits on here, and it has a big door on the top and some heat lamps inside. It's pretty simple. It's just made of thin plywood. You can come take a look here. It's got 2 heat lamps, one on each side, and we run them on a thermostat, so we can set the temperature just what we need for birds at their different stages of development. At this point, the birds are pretty independent. They're about 4 weeks old, so they're not in need of constant heat. They're able to just deal with the ambient Florida temperatures. This brooder is a 10 by 10 design, so this is only a batch of 90 that are in here now. Our last batch was 180, and this brooder would support up to about 300 birds. This is the exact same size as our field pens. This is one of our field pens. We've simply wrapped the bottom. They're pretty scraggly right now. They're missing feathers, they've got pretty bare rumps, sometimes bare chests or necks. When they're really little, they have this really downy, soft, fluffy feather, and they do look like birds from cartoons. But as they grow older, they begin to shed those feathers, and they grow back in longer feathers and harder feathers. Those protect them from the elements. At this stage, they've lost those feathers, and they're slow to grow their new feathers in. It's important that the birds have a crumble feed instead of a pellet feed when they're young. It's easier for them to pick up and handle. It's easier for them to digest. We feed an 18% non-GMO crumble feed to the birds, and we feed this from start all the way to finish. So they get that when they're in here in the brooder, and then later today when we move these birds out on pasture, they'll also have this trough full of free choice 18% protein non-GMO feed. So while they're in here, they get a really thin layer of wood chips to start with. And as the waste material builds up, we add layers of carbon, we add layers of wood chips on top of that. We get a big truckload of these planer shavings from a mill out in Milton, bring them back and set them in a pile to the side, keep them nice and dry. And then every day, when we feed, when we water, check on the birds, we bring buckets of these shavings in and fill in a nice thin layer on top of the waste so that they have a clean bedding pack that they're standing on, but also so that we get that deeper bedding pack composting really well. And that compost generates a little bit of heat, which is great for this brooder situation. It also attracts soldier flies, which lay their larvae, and the birds come in here and scratch around and eat the soldier fly larvae that are working on the decomposing of these chips. And then when we're all done, we take the hoop house straight off the top of the compost pack, and then we mound the compost up together and let it sit. It decomposes, and then later it becomes fuel for the forage in the pasture. The birds come to us at about a day or 2 days old from the hatchery. We remove them from the box, make sure they've got access to food and water, and then they spend the next 3 to 4 weeks in the brooder. And as soon as they're done, they've been weaned off of the heat that they need, and they've shown that they're strong enough to scratch and forage for themselves. We move them out into the pasture in 2 hoop houses just like this one, but with no bedding. They're just straight on the grass. And so at that 4-week period, they move out, and at about 8 weeks is when we butcher.